church benches and into the trenches. Let's make a righteous ruckus.
Hey, this is Riley again with the Righteous Ruckus podcast coming to you. I'm your host, and today I would like to do a few things I want to discuss. This is going to be released the day after the Super Bowl in 2025, and so I want to talk about kind of, I don't know if you want to call it a stereotype or what you want to call it that, but then talk about kind of being refined through the fire. All right. And I'm going to dive in. I think I'm going to switch it up this week, and I'm going to dive into the biblical text first and then give you the application afterwards. We'll see how the response is on that. If you like that setup better, great. If you like the old way that I've been doing it for a long time, where I give you the application and then discuss the verses, then let me know about that too. In any event, check this out. The Super Bowl is coming up. Tim Tebow was famous for this one. He usually had, I believe, if I remember right, it's been a while since he would write on his eye black underneath his eyes or on his shoes, put Philippians 4:13, which is, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And that seems to be, a very prevalent verse throughout sports and athletics, because, it kind of alludes to, oh, look, if I've got Jesus, then I can do anything. When, in the context, it's really about generosity, but Paul's writing that in jail. It's not like he's saying, look, in jail, I can escape through jail because I've got Christ. I can escape out of jail. He's just talking about basically being able to get through life more than anything, and the generosity of the Philippian people around in Philippian church. He's expressing about generosity, but it's cool. You can cherry pick the verse out and use it. There's a broad application for these verses. A lot of people use verses out of context. It's no big deal unless you really get things twisted to a point. We take the verses just as the original audience understood it one way, and we can apply it in a different way. And that's what people do with that Philippians 4:13. Now let's jump forward to Daniel, right? This is in Daniel. I've heard pastors call them the three asbestos boys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And what had happened there is King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, the Babylonian king, right? He had put out an edict saying, a lot of people are familiar with this story. He had put out an edict saying that he built this giant statue, giant statue. I think it was gold. And he put out this edict that anytime the music starts playing and all this, the drums start playing and the flutes and the harps, all this stuff, anytime the music kicked off, everybody's supposed to bow down to this giant statue, right? This idol of King Nebuchadnezzar. And there was, when he had erected that and he did it, and everybody fell down except for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the three Hebrew kids that said, no, we're good. Now, did they make a big commotion, and protest? And no, they just said, we're going to follow God. We're not going to bow down and worship a false idol, a false god, right? That's what they said. Well, so then Nebuchadnezzar heard about it, and he said, bring them dudes up here. And so they got brought before the king, and the king had just promoted them. The king liked these guys, right? It's not like the king hated these guys and had it out for them, but this made King Nebuchadnezzar furious. So the penalty for not bowing down before this was you get thrown into the fiery furnace. They had a big furnace that was full of flames and coals and whatever else. It's burning stuff up in there for sacrifices, right? You would get thrown in there as a sacrifice if you did not bow down. So these boys got brought up before the king. The king says, hey, I heard you didn't bow down. You really think if I throw you in there? He said, what? He said, what God can do that? What God can save you, right? He actually says this. He says, he said, now, if you're ready at the time, you hear the sound of the horn, flute, higher, blah, blah, blah. You fall down and worship the image which I have made. If you do this, this is what he told him. He gave him a second chance. If you do this, good. If you worship, good. But if you do not worship, you shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning, fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you from my hands? Right? Who is the God that will deliver you from my hands? It kind of, their response alludes to Esther in Esther 4:16, where she just says, if I perish, I perish. Right? It's kind of like these days you'll hear Christians say, what are you going to do? Threaten me with heaven? Right? What can you do to me? There's nothing you can do to me that will destroy me. I've accepted Christ as my Lord and Savior. I'm going to live forever. So this is what I want you to get at here. This is the crux of this whole thing, in my opinion. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And this is after Nebuchadnezzar says, who is the God who can deliver you from my hands? He's looking at this going, look, I'm the most powerful dude in the world right now, especially in your world, you three boys. And there's nothing that anybody can do to stop me from destroying you. And their response was this. They answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If that is the case, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. But if not, now this is where a lot of people stop reading before this. If not, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image you have set up. Notice in their response, it just gets glossed over a lot of times, and that's the part I really want to focus on. Because people use this story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego here in Daniel 3:15 through 18, right? They use this story to almost as they use Philippians 4:13, where it's like, look at the faith of these guys. These guys are awesome. And no doubt they had tremendous, tremendous faith. But they also knew the likely result of following God instead of man. They knew the likely result. They knew that ahead of time, and they were prepared for that consequence. Listen to the response again here. He said, Shadrach, this is verse 16, for 16 and 17. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer to you in this matter. If this is the case, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the fiery furnace. He can if he wants to. If it's God's will, that's another way of putting it. If it's God's will, he'll save us from the fiery furnace. He'll save us if it's his will. If it's not, just like Esther said in Esther 4:16, if I perish, I perish. That's what it said. But they said, if he saves us, he can save us. Let it be known, God, Nebuchadnezzar, our God can save us. But if he doesn't, it doesn't matter. We're not going to worship you, right? We're not going to do that. We're going to follow God instead of following man. And of course, we know the rest of the story. That really made him mad to the point where he said, fire up that furnace 7 times hotter. And they had them bound, right? Ropes put around their hands and their feet. And the guys that actually threw them in the furnace was so hot that they actually died throwing these 3 guys in there. Now, you say, oh, there was some sort of shield, or they found some sort of weird thermodynamic spot in there where the flames weren't really impinging on. No, the flames burn up the what bound their hand, the ropes on their hands and their feet. They were burned up. And the ropes were burned up. But then Nebuchadnezzar looks up and says, hey, didn't we throw 3 of them guys in there? And his buddies were like, yep. And he says, well, how come there's 4 of them in there walking around right now? Not only were they not burned up, they're walking around, and there's 4 of them, and one of them looks like a son of God. Or he may have said son of man, but it's basically son of God. There's Spode and look, blah, blah, blah. One of them looks like the son of God. Yeah. The 4th is like the son of God. This is what do they call it? A Christophany, a pre-incarnate, Christ showing up, right? Saving these guys. And it's an astounding story. It really is. It's an astounding story, and it has a lot of applications. And something that's been making this story come into mind recently is there's been a numerous amount of people that are going through various stages of decline, health-wise, stages of cancer, right? Stages of all sorts of illnesses. And it really harkens back to this. I've told you guys throughout my testimony and multiple times on here about my cancer story. Actually, just the other day was 2 years since I went in for surgery to remove a third of my colon to get rid of my cancer, right? Now, why did I survive, yet these other people die? Or these other people get it worse? Why? The reality is, because skeptics would look at me, whether it be my wreck or multiple other issues where I should have died or had the potential, very high potential to die as a result, and say, well, Riley, that's just coincidence. You can't say that was a God thing, because look, how come God doesn't save these other people from cancer? All right, that's a skeptic's point of view. Why doesn't God do that? Well, if you look at this Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, what did they say? They said, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning furnace. God is able to heal your cancer. God is able to have you survive a wreck despite all odds. God is able to have you do anything, right? God is able. Is it God's will? We don't know. Now, why would somebody go through that sort of trial, whether it be the loss of a loved one, the loss of a family member, the declining of their own health? Why would somebody go through that? Especially if they were a strong Christian, right? If they were a strong Christian, which I guess technically that's an oxymoron. If you're a Christian, you should be a strong Christian. But why would God allow, this goes back to the whole, why do bad things happen to good people, right? Well, for one thing, all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. So there is nobody that is good, all right? There's nobody that's good. Now, that being said, why would God allow this to happen? There was a saying, I can't remember the person that said it, but it was, mountaintops make great views, but fruit is grown in the valley. Fruit is grown in the valley. I've mentioned, I don't know how many times, how the trials and the tribulations, not great tribulations, the tribulations of this world, the stresses of life, the things that seem impossible at the time, when you go through that with Christ, to hearken back to that Philippians 4:13, there's a galvanizing, there's a purification, there's a refining process that takes place, right? I used to work in oil refining for 20 years. You take stuff that just comes out of the ground and you heat it up, and you use various heat and pressure to get the pure products that you want for specific applications. That's all it is. That's all oil refining, from dinosaur juice to the gasoline in your car. It's just heat and pressure. That's it. That's all. You do that stuff, and you can create gasoline that powers your vehicle. It's simple. I'm oversimplifying it, of course, but it's the pressures and the heat of life that will refine you as a Christian, that will help strip away the nonsense and the noise and the distractions of life. When you're faced with a trial, with something that you cannot get through without your faith in Jesus. I've had that multiple times, and each time I come out stronger. My faith is strengthened because of the trial that Jesus brought me through. He brought me through. He did not save me from, he brought me through it, right? And I think that's the reason. Now, you have to approach it with that same logic, the same thought process that those Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in Daniel 3. We serve a God that can. We serve a God that can. And whether he does or not, does not change the fact that I'm following him. He's God. He can do whatever he wants. Whether he chooses to save me from this or bring me through it, in any event, I'm sticking to him. He's the answer. He's the one I'm going with. That has to be the resolve. When that is your resolve, then you will be amazed what God can use you for and how God can use your life to affect other people. We've been able to give advice and assistance to multiple people because of what, when I say we, I'm talking about my wife and I, because of what we have gone through. When other people go through a similar thing, we have the ability to reach them at a point that they're at because we've experienced it. It's hard to relate. You can try. I'm not saying don't try. It's hard to relate really well and be able to fully empathize with somebody that you've never been in their shoes. And when you've been in a similar circumstance or perhaps the exact circumstance, it brings a different level of understanding and help to that person. You know, whenever I got diagnosed with cancer and I met with my pastor, Paul Blair, and, you know, we had that in common. He's a cancer survivor. I was diagnosed with cancer, right? And he was able to empathize with me. Is I using the right word there? I may empathize. Yeah, empathize with me on a level that other people could not. My dad is a cancer survivor. He's able to relate to me on a level that other people could not, right? If you've never been told you have cancer, then it's a totally different ball game than somebody that says, I can relate to you because I've known people that have had cancer. Yes, you can relate somewhat. I'm not discounting that whatsoever, but it's a whole different ball game than when you've been there, when you've had that said to you. Then you understand. And then you're able to help other people. And guess what? When the people you help get through that, if they get through it, then they're able to impact other people. It's it's an exponential impact there. It just expands. And I think that's part of the reason part of the reason why you go through those sorts of trials. I saw one the other day. Man, it was good. It said, lukewarm is not hot enough to refine. Lukewarm is not hot enough to refine. You've got to be on fire. You've got to be on fire. Look, that's Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They got thrown in there that was in a furnace that was so hot that the guys that threw them in there died from the heat. That's hot enough to refine. Whether you're talking about the actual heat that they survived, whether you're talking about the heat and the pressure put on them by a king that had the ability to say, you're dead, and people would kill him. All right. Now, are you facing that right now? Are you facing it to where you've got this, seems like an impossible battle ahead of you? There's been multiple times when you read the scriptures that that's happened. And God, several cases, like I love the story of Gideon, God makes it impossible so that you know when you come through that it was only because of him that you made it through. But ultimately, I'm going to die, even though I've gotten through multiple things. Ultimately, I'm going to die, right? But I have faith in Jesus, and because I have that faith in Jesus, I know that when my physical body, when this tent is gone, then I've got eternity to spend in the presence of God. Yeah. Man, it's good stuff. Just to think about it, to think about the battles, to think about the hardships. It's really impactful to reflect on that. And so I want you to take heart. I want you to become galvanized. I want you to become strengthened when obstacles come in your life. Instead of saying, no, I'm just going to go ahead and tuck my tail and bow down to that statue, because if I don't, then what's going to happen? I'm going to get killed, right? Just like I said earlier, what are you going to do? If you're a Christian, man, what are they going to do? Threaten you with heaven? Your life may be different, but you're going to get through it, right? You're going to get through it. I've multiple occasions. I'm out of time. I don't have time to get into them all. I'll get into more of them deeper later. Multiple times, man. There's no other explanation but God in my life. And it's really humbling, and it's really, awe-inspiring, awesome, right? To look back on those instances. But man, ultimately, stand up. Do not bow down to the idols of this world. Do not cave. Do not fold up like a cheap tent in a stiff wind, right? Don't do that. That just made me think of another story. But in any event, don't do that. Stand strong, stand firm. What do these guys do? When you're face to face with the king that has the ability to kill you, they said, we don't even owe you an answer. You do what you want. We serve a God that's a lot higher than you. You think you're the top dog. You're not. God is, right? And he found out. He found out. And so ultimately, I want this to inspire you to be courageous about sharing your faith, to be courageous about following closely with God, and to tell people your stories. Tell people your struggles, man. Don't just tell them your mountaintop victories. Tell them about the times that you were in the valleys, man, that you were struggling. Tell people, but people can relate with that. People relate with the mountaintop experience too, but people need to know about your battles in the valleys, man. They really do. They need to hear that, and they need to hear, look, man, I don't know how I would have got through that without my faith in God. Without my faith and trust in my Lord Jesus Christ, I don't think I would have made it. And that's inspiring. It's inspiring, and it can prod them to go, I've got some stuff in my own life. I sure could use some help. Maybe I should ask about how to handle it with Jesus instead of it just being me, right? And ultimately, that can lead them to a life in Christ. And ultimately, we can do our very best to make heaven crowded.